Hey you guys, happy Sunday. I thought I would put together a top 10 list of the mistakes that I've made and I see other expats making when they move to Panama. So I'm sitting at the Boga Bar. It looks over the marina, and I just discovered that La Divina Comedia opened up a restaurant just down on in the same harbor area. So I'll have to check them out another time. But I wanted to sit here for this awesome view. Boga Bar and La Divina Comedia are at Vistamar. If you're new to my channel, I'm Patty Blue Hayes. I moved to Panama in 2019. Thought I was going to live in a condo at the beach. Decided the cooler mountains were much more my taste. And I bought a fixer-upper house, renovated it for 8 months, and the rest is history. So they're not necessarily in order, but the number one is the number one. And I'm going to save that for the end, of course. All right, so number 10 would be expecting businesses and processes to be the same or like to function kind of the same way that they might in your home country. This could be everything from private businesses to government entities. And I had one of those big wake-up calls when I first moved here because I was at a restaurant and had ordered like a second cup of tea. And typically in the US, you would just get another cup of tea, but you'd just pay for the one cup. And I was charged for the second tea bag, of course, because that's the way it should be. You know, it's a cost of goods. But I was just like so flummoxed. Like, how can this be? You know, and I would hear myself say, normally this, normally they do this. I'm like, and I realized I'm in Panama. There is no normally. On top of that, it was really bad black tea, so it wasn't even like worth the extra $2.50 for the tea bag, and a whole box of that tea cost like $1.75. So I was grumpy, learned my lesson, and then there have been plenty of other lessons too. So for example, returning items to a store isn't as customer friendly as it might be in the United States. So you really have to make sure about return policies, save your receipts, ask at the checkout counter. You'll also see sometimes that they will open a box and maybe even like plug in the item to make sure it's working. And that's in your favor because you don't want to get home, especially if you've been shopping in the city and then drive a couple hours. You don't want to get back home and realize there's a part missing or there's something not right with the product. Another example is just how slow things can be sometimes, like with government offices. And maybe you've been told, okay, you need a copy of this, you need a copy of that, you need this stamped, you need that sealed, and you show up with all the things. And then there's one other thing that nobody told you about that you still also have to get and provide. So that's unfortunately kind of common. I had a experience with a washer dryer set that I bought. I bought it at Panafoto in Costa Verde, and I live in El Valle, so that's like 2.5 hours away. And I got them delivered like a few months before the casita was going to be finished, which was probably a mistake because when the washer and dryer got unloaded, the handle of the dryer just came right off, and I couldn't open the dryer. I couldn't reattach the handle. And it literally took like 2.5 months to get the salesperson to take action. And they actually did send somebody who fixed it, but it took almost 3 months to get that done. So that was a big time delay. And Also, things like insurance, it works very differently here. I learned this lesson from my car accident and submitting the claim to the covered parties insurance, and they ended up only offering me $1,000 less than what I actually paid. And no matter how many times I tried to ask, and I was using someone to help me navigate this because I couldn't do it by myself. No matter how many times we said, like, but here are all the receipts, like, this is literally like what I paid, and they wouldn't answer, they wouldn't respond. And then finally they responded, it's coming up on a year, and if you don't take the settlement, we're just going to write it off our books. So it's just in their favor. It's just kind of set up to be in their favor, unfortunately. Number 9 would be unrealistic expectations. When I look at the Facebook posts for expats in Panama or different communities within Panama, I see a lot of unrealistic expectations. Someone's planning on moving to a small mountain town, and yet they are expecting to find an international English-speaking school for their kids, organic herbs and artichokes, and a wide variety of produce, all organic. European cheeses, things that you would find at Trader Joe's and Whole Foods back in the States. Uber, to get around. And maybe, some fine dining and entertainment at night. And hospitals, medical care, and doctors. So that's just not possible in a small mountain town. You may be able to find some of those things in Boquete, or some of those things in El Valle. Those are really the only 2 mountain towns that I can think of that would offer that. For example, in Altos del Maria, there's nothing. There might be like 1 or 2 restaurants, but it's a gated bedroom community. So there's no nightlife up there unless there's private parties. There's no school in that community. There may be a couple of little shops where you can pick up, some necessities, but to do your grocery shopping and to see any doctors, you have to drive down to Coronado or drive further toward the city or into the city. You just have to have realistic expectations being an expat in a country where expats aren't catered to. We're the minority here. So there's no reason to have things that a Westerner would want in small communities, because the percentage of people who would want that is very, very small. So get your expectations more realistic by doing some research and watching videos like this one and others. There's plenty of people on YouTube who have a lot of really good information. All right, number 8 would be assuming that you can find work in Panama. So first of all, a lot of professions are reserved only for Panamanians, and it's kind of limited as to what you could do as an expat. The ways to approach this, one would be to apply to any of the global companies that have headquarters in Panama City, and apply while you're not in Panama and get the process started, because there could be benefits to that, like getting a relocation package and getting help with a visa. Maybe you get sponsored to be working here in Panama. Another option would be first you have to get a work permit. So you have to have a residency visa that allows a work permit. Then you apply for the work permit, and your Spanish needs to be tip top because it's a Spanish speaking country. So you can work, but there are restrictions and limitations. And you can also own a business, but again, you have to go through the proper channels with your residency visa, and then starting a business. And those are really good questions for your immigration attorney. That is really like the first point of contact that you should make if you're considering moving to Panama, because you might have all these ideas in mind, but the practicalities and the realities might be different than what you're thinking the future in Panama would look like for you. All right, I'm going to take a break because my delicious food just arrived, and I'm going to have my yummy salmon and salad. Okay, number 7 would be being a little too trusting of all expats because you have the common bond of being expats. I made this mistake, and I think a lot of people do, because you're kind of excited to meet other expats, and you feel like you're on this adventure in this new country, and there's just like a kind of an automatic trust that's there for people who have moved here, before you, and you feel like you can learn from them, and that there's just a bond. But I'm always saying now that trust is earned, and just be cautious with your trust. There are plenty of people who would easily have you part ways with your money, and they're good at it. It's some of them are like typical scams, and they could be professionals, right? It could be some kind of project developer, it could be a broker, it could be an insurance person, any number of things. And also it could be somebody just with very good storytelling about the hard luck that they're having, and things back home, and a sick parent or a sick child or a sick pet. So just be cautious. And sometimes the Facebook groups aren't really a good indication of if someone is trustworthy, because there are strict libel laws in Panama, so everyone's a little bit nervous to publicly say anything that could be perceived as bad or disparaging about another person or a business. So you just have to kind of proceed with caution. If it's somebody professional, I would say get a lot of references and call and check on those references, and ask some tough questions. And there's a lot of ways you can go about protecting yourself for not getting scammed, but I would definitely encourage you just to not be super trusting from the start. Okay, number 6 is kind of a mistake, but some people have done it and it's worked out just fine. And that would be not visiting before moving. So this really just depends on your risk tolerance, your sense of big adventure, and what kind of plan B, C, or D that you might have lined up. I know people who've done it and it's worked out fine and they love Panama. But then also there are people, it's not the place for them and it doesn't work out. And it's a lot of work to move to a new country, and making a visit before making that decision, even though it's an extra expense and more time, it's worth it to do, because at least you have your feet on the ground, you can smell the air, get a sense of the different communities and a couple different parts of Panama at least, For me, when I first landed, it just kind of felt like home. And I'd done some international travel because I knew I was going to be leaving the US. And so I was traveling to these other countries with that specific end goal in mind. Could I see myself living in this other country? And for the other countries, it was kind of like, maybe. And then when I landed in Panama, it was like, oh, this feels good. I feel like I'm home. And it is definitely worth just coming to visit. If you don't want to do a tour, if you want to just plan your own trip, you can always just hire a guide for the day in a couple of the areas that you're considering. And that's a good way to get just like a fast introduction. Let's say that you were in Boquete or David and you hire a guide to show you, okay, here's some neighborhoods where you can find this kind of rent. These are the grocery stores. This is where people go to see doctors. These are the municipal offices. You can get your car registration done here. Or like in Boquete, you have to go to David to get these things done. So that is something I would recommend, is just make a trip, have a visit before you make such a big life-changing decision. Number 5, I easily could have been guilty of doing, but I didn't because I took my time. Number 5 is bringing too much stuff. It is liberating to go through your things and purge belongings. I come from a long lineage of pack rats, collectors, sentimentalists, and I was one of those people. I mean, I think the most ridiculous thing I did was after my mom died, and she was living in Florida, and I cleaned out her belongings. I put in storage every single wicker basket that she ever collected, and even like there were blue cotton balls from a drugstore in Connecticut, in the town where we used to live. So my mom moved these stupid cotton balls from Connecticut down to Florida. I kept them in Florida in storage for 7 years and then moved them out to California. All the wicker baskets were ruined. They were all like disintegrated. The cotton balls did survive, but I had to laugh when I unpacked them, like, why did I save these? So I had about 8 months of time to purge before I made the move. And while it was challenging, 8 months was a good amount of time for me. And because I was paying for a couple of pallets to be shipped, I had that financial motivation in mind. Like, well, I don't want to pay a lot to move things. And my original plan was to buy a condo, and it was furnished, so I didn't think that I needed any, kitchen supplies or things like that. I did bring some things, some favorite things. And that's recommended, if you have like really good quality knives or special appliances, pots and pans, I would bring those. So I got rid of every piece of clothing that was synthetic, because in a tropical climate, I don't find synthetic material to be comfortable at all. It's a little challenging to find like natural fibers here, like, cotton, linen. Rayon is actually a breathable fabric. But my uniform basically since I moved to Panama has been these Amazon Essential t-shirts and shorts that I get from Kohl's when I go back to the States. Read that book on, tidying up, read blogs, watch videos on how to purge your stuff. There are ways that you can do it so that it's not so emotionally gripping. I knew I was going to have a hard time with photos and photo albums, So what I did was I took pictures of the pages of the photo album, and then I kept some of the photos that were, the really old photos, and maybe like 1 or 2 photo albums that I kept. And I'm happy with what I brought. I brought, just some really pretty pottery that I had collected, some little, collectible tchotchkes that don't take up a lot of space. What else did I bring? I brought some books, but books do not do well in this climate. And I had a lot of art books that were my mom's. They were very sad to part with, but I kept weighing like the vision of the life that I wanted versus the, cost of, holding on to all these things. And the vision of what I wanted was always the priority, and, made me feel like lighter. And holding on to the possessions was heavier. And so I had to let go. And it's super liberating. I highly recommend doing it. Okay, number 4, not getting any health insurance because you figure you'll pay as you go because healthcare is affordable. I did this. I don't know if you've seen my video on my hospital stay and then my surgery in a public hospital. But this is what I did for 6 years. I just figured, oh, it's cheap enough. I can just, pay for doctor visits as I go. And, I had mammograms, I had dental cleanings, I had the female exams, and had some blood work done, and was not thinking about something urgent, or needing surgery like imminently. And while those doctor visits are affordable, surgery in a private hospital is not as inexpensive. And so you can go in the public system, but it is very bare bones. It's a long wait. You have to wait, to get surgery. I had to wait like almost 3 months. The hospital, the public hospital is, while the one I was in was clean and the people were very kind and professional, sometimes there's no toilet paper in the stalls. There was no soap in the shower. The shower just had like one giant tube that, was coming out. There was no hot water. And this became apparent when I had to shower and shave before my surgery. And I was hooked up to these, 2 different IV lines. You can see that video just to get an idea of what the surgery story is like. But after that, I decided I think I'd prefer to have private health care. And so I got insurance, and I'm paying $127 a month. And this family medical care plan allows up to 3 pre-existing conditions, and the one that I got is only for the San Fernando Hospital in Panama City, and also the San Fernando Clinic in Coronado, and they do actually have a hospital in the Azuero. But that insurance is affordable. So, and I can go see a specialist for $15. I have some follow-up appointments that I need to do, and I need to go see a cardiologist, and that appointment is going to be $15. Now, I might have to go to the city to do it because the cardiologist was supposed to be coming out to the San Fernando Clinic in Coronado, but he hasn't been there in 3 months, and he was supposed to be there in September, but it's already halfway through September, and there's no indication that a cardiologist is going to be coming. So I definitely recommend that you get some kind of insurance. My surgery would have been $5,000 at a public hospital out of pocket in the city. And, you know, while that's also still affordable, I can think of other things that I want to spend $5,000 on and not having a gallbladder surgery. So I'm happy now to have my health insurance, and I do recommend that you get a plan to be covered. Okay, number 3, again, I've had people tell me this, and I see it in the Facebook groups. Oh, I'm just going to live in a local community, and I don't really want to associate with expats, and I'm not going to live in an expat enclave, and I'm just going to make friends with local Panamanians. That's great. So that's number 3 big mistake, is assuming that you're going to, you know, just live in a local community, but you don't have fluent Spanish. So you can, by all means, but if you don't have the language, how are you going to make all these great friends with the Panamanians when you don't have the language? So that's something to think about, because English is not widely spoken. It's a Spanish-speaking country, and as much as you may not want to be around other expats, it's going to feel pretty isolating if you move into a community where you can't communicate with your neighbors. My neighbors, my direct neighbors, are Spanish speaking, and you know, we can try and communicate a little bit, and maybe through Google Translate, but I am in a town with other expats, and that is beneficial. So if you're thinking, you know, that you're just going to live like in the countryside among, you know, local people, and, you know, grow your own food, and, you know, rescue dogs, that's wonderful. But, you know, go to some of these communities where you'd be thinking about living, and self-assess with an honest lens to see if that's really something that you could be doing. All right, so you know I can't have a top 10 mistakes that expats make list and not have real estate on there. So that's number 2, is buying property too quickly. I was going to be guilty of this, but the deal didn't come through when I was supposed to buy a condo. I recommend, and a lot of other people recommend, live in Panama for at least a year before you would consider buying anything, unless your visa is dependent on you purchasing real estate. In those scenarios, I would recommend either a gated community or a condo, something that might be easier to sell if you decide you don't want to keep the property, because you can sell the property after 3 years and still keep your residency. It's super easy to get seduced with the idea of buying property, because there's a lot of properties available. And, you know, I got seduced by the beach condo that was under $200,000, and the scammy realtor who was telling me, buy now, prices are going up, the project is going to sell out, it's never going to be this price again, you know, that type of thing. So if anybody's saying that to you, just, they're lying. It's very tempting, I know, but just resist. Go buy a souvenir. Go buy, you know, like a stuffed sloth and some coffee if you have to buy anything, or a hat. But, you know, don't buy a piece of property, because it's really easy to buy, and it can take years to sell. On my channel, I profile some properties because I love doing walkthroughs of properties. I used to be a commercial real estate appraiser back in Los Angeles, and I just am fascinated by real estate. But yeah, some of these houses have been on the market for a long time, because it's not that easy to sell. And real estate is not that straightforward here. In the US, there's a MLS. In Panama, there is one, but not everybody uses it because there's a pretty hefty fee for brokers to use it. On top of that, you have a lot of private party sales, or you have Panamanians who don't want it publicly known that their property is for sale, and so they might, go through a broker. I really think the best way to find properties is by building relationships, driving around neighborhoods and communities, talking to people, and working with a licensed broker. There are ethical people who don't have a license, but they work under a licensed broker, and that is legal in Panama if you get the sense that they are well informed, because some brokers are not informed at all. I mean, I had the craziest experiences looking for property in El Valle. Brokers who didn't even have the right keys to the house, didn't have any information on, like where's the septic tank, and when was it last cleaned out, or have all the property taxes been paid? What's the market like, in the area? So you take your time with those things. And I think it does help to have also a cursory, appraiser, or at least someone who knows about construction to, do a walkthrough of the house that you might be thinking of buying. Condos are obviously a different market altogether, but for a house, I mean, they're pretty basic construction. There's no attics, there's no basements, there's no HVAC systems, so they're pretty simple, but it's worth getting some things checked out and taking your time, because also Panama has so much to offer and so many different areas that you may think that you love, one area, but you go visit another and you kind of fall in love with that area. So take your time. It's easy enough to find rentals that are furnished. Spend a few months in different places before you would decide to purchase any property. All right, we have come to the number one mistake that expats make when moving to Panama. And I did this one too. Not learning Spanish before you move. I didn't really embrace learning Spanish because I had this huge limiting belief that I couldn't learn languages. And that's not true. So I had to change that story, and I'm now on like a 1,025-day streak on Duolingo, but it really took me a long time to get super consistent with it. And I did try kind of haphazardly before I moved to Panama, but I quickly kind of dropped off on my attempts. And I would highly encourage you to learn just the basics of some Spanish, enough to say hello, thank you, have a nice day, and to just have that. And even to be able to say in Spanish, hablas inglés, right? Do you speak English? Don't say in English, do you speak English? Because it's easy to say hablas inglés, right? And it just shows that you are at least making a small effort. And I have found in my 6 years of being here that no one has rolled their eyes when I've taken out my phone to use Google Translate. No one. They've been very patient with me, and I think with most expats. So I'm happy to say that I understand so much more than I did when I first moved here. It's kind of surprising. Like, I can read some things and understand them. I can listen to things and understand, and it feels really good. I would like to kind of up my game on the learning because I'm only doing Duolingo, which really isn't a big time commitment. And so I would like to do that. But I would encourage you to take a class in person or a class online or use an app. Get an accountability partner. If you're going to be moving here with a spouse or a partner, then start together. Make it a fun kind of goal that you can do. And that's it. What do you think about my top 10 mistakes? Have you made them? Would you have made them? Are you glad to know about them and you won't make these mistakes? I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next week.